Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. At the end of episode 5 for Andor, I was so disappointed. I know what every one of you guys were thinking. They keep stringing us along. Why don't they just show us the raid already, right? I know. I'm extremely impatient. It's my greatest weakness, and honestly, most of my severe injuries, broken bones, concussions are due to that lack of patience I have. Now, I begrudgingly acknowledge that these episodes, despite stringing us along, are done really well. I mean, episode 5 was just a masterpiece in world building, character building, and further getting us into this show. They're really milking it at this point, though. And we're gonna examine all of those very, very deep details in this video. But I gotta say, man, this build-up is so infuriating and good at the same time. It almost reminds me of like a really good RPG where you have to do a bunch of side missions leading up to some like bigger heist or final mission. And as you go, they keep stringing you along, and you start to realize, wow, these side missions are amazing. So amazing that you almost begin to worry that the final mission can't live up to the hype, because the hype is real and it's big. Anyway, I digress. Let's go to the breakdown. There's gonna be 2 portions in this video. First, we're gonna look at Aldhani, and then we'll look at Coruscant. In the first scene, we get a close-up of Andor's kit. We see his Briar Pistol, which is a brand that some Star Wars fans might immediately recognize as the preferred brand of choice for Kyle Katarn. If you played Star Wars video games like Jedi Outcast and Jedi Academy, you'll remember this famous Imperial turned Rebel turned Jedi. The MW-20 Briar Pistol Andor uses was passed down to him by his father, who perished at the hands of the Empire. Like his Rogue One side piece, the A280 Covert Field Edition, the M20 Briar Pistol was originally a long gun converted into a smaller and more fun concealable size. Also notice the power unit around the barrel of the MW-20. If it's anything like the K16 Briar Pistol, that means this little sidearm is capable of releasing its entire power pack in one gigantic burst for a whole lot of power. Got more power! The other pistol that Andor has is the murder weapon he used in the first scene of the show. It's funny that he didn't actually get rid of this incriminating piece of evidence. I'm not exactly sure what model this is, but if you guys know out there, please let me know in the comment section below. With all of you fans combined, your search abilities are going to be more powerful than mine. When Andor walks over to Arvel's skein and collects his weapons, Arvel notices that his eyes go down for a millisecond to his chest tattoo.
You know what this means, don't you?
Which means that they have something in common here. But what exactly are these tattoos? Well, one is a crate head tattoo. Nipple. Remember the crate dragon? It's that fearsome beast from Tatooine, respected by both the Tuskens and the moisture farmers. The second tattoo is called By the Hand, which honestly could mean anything. There was a Legends organization known as the Emperor's Hand. These were special dark side operatives who assisted the Emperor directly. Amongst the most famous of them were Mara Jade, the legendary wife of Luke. But then Andor gives us a clue what these tattoos actually means when he tells Arvel that he served on the Sippo Youth Detention Center when he was 13 years old for 3 years, after which he was sent to Mimban as a cook with the Imperial Army. This most likely means that Arvel Skeen got those tattoos when he was in a youth center or in an Imperial prison where he might have, I don't know, joined a prison gang. That's kind of what the crate heads sound like. And/or, not and/or, but and/or, he could have been a conscript within the Imperial Army, and that's what this tattoo, the By the Imperial Hand, stands for. It sounds a lot more imperial, whereas crate head sounds definitely like some kind of triad-like criminal organization. Then Arvel Skeen says the following.
The axe forgets, but the tree remembers.
He said it! He said it!
Yeah, they said the title of the episode in the episode. What does it actually mean, though? Well, it means that the individual who creates harm onto another individual will forget that act far sooner than the individual who receives the harm. Plus, later we find out that Arvel Skeen's brother was a tree farmer, and he had killed himself after an Imperial Prefect took his land, which is where we get this line about the axe and the trees. Finally, one more sidetrack, I promise. We go to Ferrix, where Supervisor Blevin is setting up a new operation. A young captain who is in place in charge of the local garrison, who seems very unfocused, asks the supervisor the following.
Could I be made prefect? The title, I know it doesn't come with extra pay.
The captain asks for this rank even though he knows that the title is more or less meaningless. This scene brilliantly shows us the type of officer who ultimately forced Arvel's brother to kill himself, a self-absorbed individual who's only looking at this rank.
Imperial Prefect.
Prefect.
a prefect. It's literally the only thing he cares about. Oh, and then there's also this line.
They built a lot of cages, huh?
That's a loose reference to the credits that are locked in the cage in the base they're gonna raid. The Gilroys are just basically flexing at this point their artistic muscles. And I said Gilroys, not Gilroy, because there are 3 Gilroys and they all actually worked on this episode arc. It's kind of amazing to have such a collaborative effort between 3 people who are clearly in tune with each other. It's almost like a collaborative auteur project, which is a oxymoron until you actually see it. It's beautiful. Tony produces, by the way, Johnny edited this, and Dan wrote this episode. Next, we have the scene with Cassian and Carr's Nemec. We get to learn a little bit more about this young rebel who spills out his ideology in 2 brilliantly placed props. First, we have an almost mechanical-looking navigational tool, which is reminiscent of a sextant. It's most likely used to navigate amongst the stars using celestial light. Nemec is really an old soul in a young man's body, a hipster of sorts, who rejects the ease of modern technology for something more concrete and physical. I can almost see him hanging out in a speakeasy with period-appropriate clothing, holding a film camera because, film is finite, and it makes the shooter really think about each and every one of those photos that they shoot. His second prop is a manifesto. He's a man of words and ideas. I've seen such characters in war zones before. Foreign volunteers in a conflict they don't have to fight, driven by purpose and belief in a set of principles that usually can't be seen from a foxhole. I like Nemec, but unfortunately, I think the only thing that's going to survive this mission from him are those props. Manifestos are usually best read when the person who wrote them have long passed. Next, Vel and Tarman test Andor about their upcoming mission. Or at least that's what it seems like at first. It turns out they're actually asking real questions. This is no test. They have no idea how to get the ship they're trying to steal off the ground. It's another important scene. It tells us 2 things. Vel and Tarman are completely over their heads here, which explains why Vel accepted this 11th hour mercenary, Cassian Andor, to their mission. It also shows us that Vel and Tarman are smart enough to acknowledge their own deficiencies and willing to go out and ask for help in spite of whatever their ego might be screaming. It's a fine balancing act to be a leader. As Cheryl Carr finds out when he's getting grilled by his mother on Coruscant.
You might as well wear a sign that says, "I promise to disappoint you."
And these 2 individuals, despite being very raw, have a good foundation and personality for leadership. They're firm when they need to be and flexible when it can benefit the mission. And for those of you guys who don't understand the technical talk here about the heist, essentially the ship that they're stealing is not really a train like the one in Solo. The rail that they're talking about is simply a launch mechanism that flings the ship through a chute, which is aimed into the sky. I'm guessing the load here in the ship is so heavy that they can't just use simple repulsor lifts, which are like anti-gravity pods. And so they'll probably need to use something a little more powerful, maybe like even chemical rocket boosters. This is why the team needs to calculate the weight on board so that they can adjust the thrust to make sure that they have enough power to get into the sky, but also don't burn through all of their fuel before they reach orbit. Meanwhile, we have Lieutenant Gorn, the rebels' inside man in the Imperial base. He's a stern individual. He makes it clear that he's in command, but unlike most of his sadistic counterparts in the Imperial Navy and Stormtrooper Corps, Lieutenant Gorn does seem to care about his men somewhat. Whatever punishments he levies, or at least threatens his men with, are generally pretty mild.
I'll be back in an hour. This had better be well on its way, or I promise you, I'll be revisiting the schedule for winter furloughs.
He actually seems like a half-decent motivator of men, and a good Imperial officer, which unfortunately means that at one point or another he'll defect. Most of this infiltration team is going to be using E11s, which is a standard issue Imperial blaster rifle. The girls, Vel and Cinta, however, will be using those interesting looking AK pattern blasters. Or could they be slug throwers? I mean, they have like charging handles, they have a magazine. These are not things you usually see in a blaster. Also, the fact that no one knows where these girls are going intrigues me. Because there's actually one huge advantage that a slug thrower has over a blaster, and that's the lack of light and color from their shots. Unless you can see the muzzle flash or you're using tracer rounds, it's really hard to trace a bullet back to its source, especially if it's super loud where you are because there's some kind of crazy once-in-a-year celestial event going on overhead. So maybe these AK pattern weapons are actually slug throwers and they'll be used for stealth. If this were any other show aside from Andor, if this were like Book of Boba Fett or Kenobi, I'd be like, okay, I'm overthinking this, but I mean, Tony Gilroy and the Gilroy brothers are clearly overthinking this, and it's awesome. Lastly, I want to talk about the scene where the TIE Fighter buzzes over the group. In general, the few times that these rebels have seen any Imperial ships, they've been scared and terrified, which honestly is great to see because that is the reality of any infantry soldier on the ground. As weak and fragile as a TIE fighter might seem to us Star Wars fans who were used to seeing these tiny fighters on the bottom of the pecking order in space battles, to an infantry soldier, a TIE fighter might as well be a flying tank, especially when they're exposed out there in the open with no cover. And that shot where the TIE fighter buzzes right over our heads shows us just how powerful these starships can be compared to a lowly grunt. It's really the little things that get me. Meanwhile, back on Coruscant, we see further cracks in Mon Mothma's relationship with her husband and even daughter. I guess there's a reason that we've never heard of either of these individuals. Clearly, these two are caught up in the trivial day-to-day matters and concerns that any upper-level Coruscanti might find themselves worrying about. I mean, everyone's suffering is relative, I guess. The individual on Ferrix and the individual on the upper levels of Coruscant all have their own problems that probably seem very tremendous to them at any certain point in time. But clearly, what separates Mon Mothma from everyone else is that she can take a step back and have more context over her own situation and compare that to the suffering of the wider galaxy. Unfortunately, Mon Mothma's daughter takes after her husband.
The point is, we have a schedule. The driver's waiting. I've planned on this and we're going.
You're only doing it to show off.
What?
Just go.
What would I be showing off?
You're involved somehow.
Mon Mothma clearly is not a self-absorbed person. She spent her life as an advocate for those who don't have a voice. Another example of how different Mon Mothma is to her husband Perrin is this reoccurring conversation they keep having about what the name of their driver is.
Driver's here.
Cloris.
Yes.
You know his name?
What's his name?
Cloris.
Mon Mothma, who's busy balancing a secret rebellion and her duties as a galactic senator, meanwhile trying to avoid the ISB from arresting her, can still remember the name of her new driver. What exactly does her douchey Camino-wearing husband do anyway? Meanwhile, we see how the other live underground. Cheryl Carr's mom's apartment barely gets any light from the surface, yet you can tell she's a proud old woman, and she's keen on helping Cyril get back onto his feet. She also picks Cyril apart in a way only a mother with high expectations and even more love for her child can.
Is that how you've been presenting yourself to the world?
Cheryl Carr doesn't realize it by the look on his face, but, his mother's gonna be batting for him more than any other person in the galaxy. In between spoonfuls of blue milk-covered cereal, we learn that Cyril's uncle, Harlow, might actually have a job for him. It'll be interesting to see what kind of job that Uncle Harlow actually has for Cyril and what side of the law he's on. There are plenty of different activities one can get involved in the lower levels of Coruscant. Just saying that has gotten me excited. I really want to see the lower levels of Coruscant more. On top of that, we can really see where Cheryl Carr's intuitive detective abilities come from. They come from his mom. His mom really can get a lot out of a small conversation.
Well, you could have come anytime you wanted.
Any civilized being knows an open invitation is no invitation at all.
People keep saying, by the way, that Luthen Rael reminds them of Palpatine. No, they have it completely wrong. Cyril's mom is Palpatine.
I told him how sorry you were about what happened. I stressed that it was a large enough mistake to be deeply educational.
Yes, I heard some of that.
The level of manipulation this woman is willing to do to get Cyril a job will be legendary. Speaking of Luthen Rael, we get to see another side of him in his shop late one night. It's not super serious rebel operative Luthen Rael or cheerful antique curator Luthen Rael. It's worried Luthen Rael. Despite what we've seen before, we finally see the human cracks emerge in this facilitator of the heist. He knows the stakes involved and he worries. It's another side of this extremely complex character. So there you have it, guys. That is our breakdown of episode 5 of Andor, and hit that subscribe and notification bell down below because let's be honest, you're not going to find a better breakdown of the Andor series in here. Well, guys, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy,